I'm going to call this meeting of the Plan Commission to order. Madam Secretary, can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Ackerson? Ms. Bindum? Mr. Fell? Mr. Fitch?
Here.
Mr. Hopkins?
Here.
Mr. Otto?
Here.
Mr. Storr?
Here.
Mr. Trail?
Here.
Mr. Turner?
Here.
We do have a quorum. I note that Mr. Fell has recused himself because he's involved in this case. So, we don't have any changes to the agenda, or do we? No? Approval of the minutes of September 10th, 2015 regular Plan Commission meeting. Got to get a motion. Don't be shy. Moved by Ms. Bindum, second by Mr. Turner. Any changes to the minutes? We'll do this on a voice vote. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The minutes are approved. We do have a communication. We have a email from Dennis and Aisha Chiaramonte. This is their residence at the 404 West Springfield, which is right near the proposal that we're going to hear tonight in the Boneyard Creekway. And they oppose the proposal. It will change the type of residence in the neighborhood, make them more transient. It will involve the removal of trees, green space, and create an atmosphere lacking in natural sunlight, replaced with artificial light. In addition, the sense of security we now have, knowing our neighbors, feeling comfortable walking down the sidewalk in front of homes, will certainly be impacted. The anonymity of an apartment complex will inevitably take away from our current small-town atmosphere that we enjoy and wish to preserve. So that will be placed in the record. We don't have any continued public hearings. We don't have any old business. Therefore, we will open a new public hearing. This is Boneyard Creekway case number CW 2015-04, request by Peter Baxa for construction of 3 multifamily apartment buildings located at 402, 408, and 412 West Springfield Avenue in the Boneyard Creek District. Get a staff presentation, then I'll explain the procedures for a public hearing, and we'll take testimony. Mr. Engstrom, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Fitch. Okay. As you read in the introduction, this is a request for a creekway permit at 402, 408, and 412 West Springfield. It's actually 4 separately platted lots with 3 addresses. The request is to install 3 multifamily buildings of 4, 3, and 4 units respectively, and to install temporary parking on the vacant lot behind 408 Springfield. These properties are in the Boneyard Creek Overlay District. Therefore, a creekway permit is required. The creekway section of the zoning ordinance, section 13.4, it spells out the procedures for any development, demolition, construction, paving, or earth moving in the district. It requires a creekway permit. And in most cases, those are granted administratively. Basically, any property in the Creekway District that's touched by the floodplain, we just want to make sure that that earth movement doesn't disturb the creek and that it's in harmony with the Boneyard Creek Master Plan. So the ordinance allows for review by the zoning administrator in consultation with the Boneyard Creek Commissioner and the Director of Public Works for projects that conform to the zoning ordinance, or for projects that take up to bonus provisions of a certain level. In this case, the site plan would make use of bonus provisions to increase the height by about 7 feet and to reduce the side yards by about 6 feet. The zoning administrator can approve increases in height up to 12 feet and setback reductions up to 30 feet. The preliminary conference was held for this back in, I think, August and September. There was a little discussion about reserving open space for the future Boneyard Creek improvements. The applicant and his architect made a few changes to the site plan, and at a second Creekway preliminary conference, the site plan was approved by the zoning administrator in consultation with the Creekway commissioner and the director of public works. The zoning administrator sent out an intent to issue approval to plan commission and to city council, and city officials on city council requested that this case be forwarded to plan commission for final approval, which is allowed by the procedures spelled out in the zoning ordinance. A little bit of context. So this area is it was covered in the 1978 Boneyard Creek Master Plan. It was not covered in the 2008 Master Plan. That only went down to Main Street. Anything south of Main Street was not included in that plan. So our direction on this area is out of date. Elements of that plan were incorporated into our 2005 comprehensive plan. So that's kind of where we look to for guidance on this area. I'll show you a little context to the area. So Springfield Avenue on this block is some very oddly shaped lots. These lots are narrow. The zoning district is B2, neighborhood business arterial, and the minimum width in that district is 60 feet. These lots are all much narrower, between 40 and 49 feet. There's a row of 6, 7 homes, old single-family homes packed in here. And then there's an alley just north of those. And then there's some old lots that would have been used for garages or carriage houses north of those. And directly north of that is the Boneyard Creek. Looking at the land uses around, directly to the east is an apartment building, the Opera House. The sites themselves they contained single-family homes and a duplex previously, but those have been torn down. One of them actually had caught fire and was ordered to be demolished. The other homes in the area are single-family rentals and a duplex. And then south of Springfield Avenue, we've got a 4-story apartment with commercial on the ground floor, another single-family rental, and some commercial uses. Taking a look at the zoning, the subject parcels are all B2, neighborhood business arterial. To the north, across the creek, is R2, single-family. To the east is B4, central business. To the south is, again, B2. Looking at the comprehensive plan, you can see the parcels outlined in turquoise here. The future land use for this area is designated as campus mixed use. If you go over to Lincoln Avenue, you can see that's the designation. And then the comprehensive plan calls to promote Springfield Avenue as a key transit link from the downtown to campus. And basically it calls for mixed-use buildings all along that link. And looking at the floodplain map. So here are our parcels, again, outlined in blue or teal. The blue kind of aqua line running through here guess it looks blue up there. The blue line is the center of the creek. And then this pink area bounded in red is actually the floodway. So if the creek were to flood, this is the area where water would be moving. And you can see the northern parcel and the four that we're looking at would actually be in the floodway. And then the orange area further from the creek is the floodplain. It's the 100-year floodplain. So this is the area, according to FEMA, this is the area that has a 1% chance of flooding during a storm event. So as you can see, the 100-year floodplain creeps down and cuts off half of 412 Springfield, almost half of 408, and maybe a third of 402. And then this is just it was an existing conditions map survey from before the demolition of the homes. Okay. Oh, I guess one other thing I wanted to talk about with the sites is ownership. So we're looking at kind of an odd pattern of ownership in this area. The homes outlined are owned by Mr. Baxa. Most of the homes on this block are owned by another gentleman, and then there's a couple other owners towards the west side of the block as well. So it's a mix of ownership, and the applicant was unable to consolidate lots, and that's kind of the driving force behind the design that we're going to look at tonight. Okay. So here's the site plan. You can see the footprints of the three buildings on the three lots facing Springfield. North of the alley is intended to be a parking area initially to serve the apartments. Eventually, it will become open space as part of a future Boneyard Creek redevelopment. We'll get into the details of that in a minute here. But currently, the applicant is proposing to dedicate this area. It's a strip of land within 25 feet of the Boneyard Creek center line. And that's required by the Boneyard Creek ordinance to make sure that every development near the creek has the possibility for a potential multi-use path should that be developed. And then, that's all I'll say about that for now. You can see access would be off of McCullough Street through the existing alley. The 408 and 412 would each have required parking on them. The north 408, which we call Lot 3 here, would also have parking. Initially, it was proposed to have 4 parking spaces, but the Boneyard Creek Commissioner wanted to save this tree, so the applicant swapped out parking on 408 down here. So the garbage and recycling for 408 would be up on this north part here, and the tree would remain. Taking a closer look at the site plans, here's 402. This is an interesting property. There's just a strip of dedicated right-of-way directly adjacent to this property, which serves as access to 402.5, which is just north of this property. Here's the footprint. I guess I'll talk about setbacks here while we look at these 3 site plans. The properties, all three of them would be conforming for a setback in the front yard and the rear yard. The side yards would not be conforming, but they'd be within what is allowed in the Boneyard Creek bonus provisions. So these buildings, let me go to the rendering. You can see here, the buildings would appear to be, two of the buildings would appear to be 4 stories tall. They're 2 stories with a mezzanine level in each level. Here's kind of a rendering. That's 402 and 412 Springfield. 408 would be 3 stories tall, but it would have a shed roof with access to a rooftop patio. So the heights of these buildings would be 40 to 42 feet. The B2 district is kind of tricky in that it requires an additional side yard if the building is going to be over 25 feet in height. It requires 3 feet of additional side yard for every 10 feet that you go over the 25-foot limit. But the overall height limit in B2 is 35 feet, and the overall height limit in a Boneyard Creek district is 12 feet over the original the original height limit. So in this case, the most that could be awarded through the Creekway permit would be 47 feet. As I mentioned, these buildings would be about 40 to 41, 42 feet. And being over 25 feet, you have an additional 6 feet of required side yard. Okay, let me scroll back up here and show you. Okay, so for 402 Springfield, the required side yard for both sides would be 13 feet. The side yard in B2 is now 7 feet, and the additional 6 feet would make it a 13-foot required side yard. As you can see, the proposed lot, the lot is only 46 feet wide. So with those 2 side yards, the buildable area would be a very thin strip of land. So the development as proposed would have a 10-foot setback in general here, but there are some bays that kind of pop out, and that's true for all of the three developments. 10-foot setback from the property line with a little bay that pops out. So the actual side yards for these developments would be, they would vary from 7 feet to 8 feet 6 inches. So we talked a little bit about height and side yards. These derivations from the absolute limits in B2, these are allowed with the Creekway permit. It's considered a bonus provision. And the reason is to move the building out of, as far out of the floodplain as possible. So you can see on the site plan, this line cutting through the property is the floodplain. So to actually build anything out of the floodplain and out of the required yards would be impossible. But through the Boneyard Creek provisions, if you can push as much of the building out of the floodplain as possible, it allows some flexibility in terms of side yard reductions and height increase. And the other zoning standards, floor area ratio, open space ratio, required parking, those are all met. Okay. So the last part of the memo here is talking about the criteria for approval of a a creekway plan. There are 6 criteria listed that the zoning administrator and creekway commissioner and director of public works all considered in granting the permit. First of all, whether the creekway permit is compatible with the 2008 Boneyard Creek Master Plan as amended from time to time and in a manner consistent with the Urbana Comprehensive Plan. Whether the location, size, and type of the proposed use are appropriate to the objectives of the district. Whether the proposed use is compatible with the character of the area in which it's located. Whether the proposed use will be compatible with the spirit of the underlying B2 zoning district. Whether there's adequate community services to serve the proposed use, such as streets, water, sewer, public school facilities. And finally, whether the design as proposed to size, height, and open space allows for adequate access to light, air, and surrounding streets, parkways, and properties. So I'm going to pull up an excerpt from the 1978 plan. So there's not much guidance for this area in terms of the most recent Boneyard Creek plan. Looking at the 1978 plan, so here's Springfield Avenue. Main Street comes in here, and you'll see the 1978 plan called for Main Street to stop here at McCullough and instead go straight east. And that would allow for the installation of a plaza over towards Race Street. Obviously, this street reconfiguration never occurred. So we can't really take too much guidance from this. We can look at the subject parcels themselves along Springfield Avenue. And I have those outlined here in kind of pinkish color. So as you can see, the 78 plan basically called for the 3 parcels along along Springfield to remain as they were untouched, just housing. And then the northern parcel, the lot 3, would eventually become open space to access the creek. Looking at the comprehensive plan goals, protect and beautify existing waterways. This would allow for that. Protect the floodway of the Boneyard Creek. This would move development out of the floodway entirely. Development regulations should protect floodways and major drainage ways. This would be consistent with that. Basically, the proposed plans are appropriate to the purposes of the Boneyard Creek District as laid out in the zoning ordinance. They would allow adequate access to air and light. They would be keeping in harmony with the B2 district intent of allowing for major uses on our arterials. Another plan we looked at was the downtown plan of 2012. So that has a major goal of increasing the amount of housing in and near downtown. So that goal would be realized with this proposed plan. It would allow for professionals or graduate students to live near downtown. The additional, there would be a net addition of 7 dwelling units, so that would not noticeably increase traffic. In terms of sanitary sewers, they would have to, there's a private line actually on these properties along Springfield, and that would have to be converted to a public line with the redevelopment of these sites in conjunction with the additional property owners along Springfield. So the last information, during our Creekway preliminary conference, the Creekway Commissioner expressed some concern about a couple things about preserving this entire area as open space for the development of the creek, and additionally about saving this tree. So saving the tree, the commissioner wanted to make sure that we don't remove trees along the creek because that would allow more sunlight, which allows more algae to grow, which hampers water quality. So this tree is saved with the new plan here. In terms of open space, the developer has agreed to basically turn over access and use rights for the entirety of Lot 3. So this is a little above and beyond what we can ask for in a zoning approval, but we're working with owners of all the properties along the creek to get assessments to see what the easements would cost and to purchase those easements. But the zoning administrator and Creekway Commissioner had written up some language which would condition this approval on the signing over of that easement. And basically the way that easement would work is it would dedicate this this strip right now, so we would have access immediately. But at such time as the creek, this phase of the creek is developed as a park, the rest of this Lot 3 would be vacated. The parking would be removed. They're going to use a temporary surface like chip and seal. So that would be removed, and this the parking would either be replaced off-site, or it would have to be replaced off-site within 600 feet. And at that time, the city would work with whoever is owning it at that time to make sure that there's a lot that could be used. There's a couple city lots within 600 feet. The applicant owns this building adjacent to the development, which has some extra parking spaces. The plan is to use those. As I mentioned before, the zoning administrator had approved the plan. There was an appeal by a city council person. And that's why we're here before you tonight. So Plan Commission, your options are to review the plan and see if it meets the criteria I've listed. The zoning administrator and Creek Commissioner found that the plan does meet those criteria. So your options are to approve with the conditions that were originally imposed. You may approve it subject to changes or additional conditions, or you may deny the permit subject to it not meeting the criteria. If so, please state findings as to where the application is deficient. The recommendation from the zoning administrator was for approval of the plan as presented, subject to these conditions. The applicant agrees to immediately provide a public access easement extending 25 feet south of the center line of the creek, as shown on the plan, prior to construction of the proposed apartments. Condition 2, the applicant agrees to enter into negotiations with the city to sell at fair market value as determined by a certified appraiser an additional easement for future public use of the remainder of Lot 3 that is not covered by the public access easements required in Item 1, the terms of which are outlined in the attached draft easement, which I went over those terms, which provides for the installation of dust-free temporary parking surface. And finally, the applicant agrees to preserve the tree located on Lot 3 as shown in the site plan. At this time, I'd be happy to take questions, and we have Adrian Strom representing the applicant as well.
Great, thank you, Mr. Engstrom. Before I ask if there's any questions of staff, I just want to clarify our authority in this case and what the process is. And looking at the boneyard provisions of the zoning ordinance, we can grant this application with the, these conditions or others. We can deny the permit based on reasons that we enunciate. And then there's a third option, that is we can defer action on the application based on a determination that it doesn't meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance or the comprehensive plan, et cetera, et cetera. And if in that case, or in any case, then the city council, in the third case, it mentions specifically that the city council would then consider it. And in any case, any of our decision here could be appealed to the city council. Is that correct?
Yeah, just a little clarification on that final option. Reading closely, we determined that
It's basically the same as denying, is the way I read it.
Well, it says you can kick the can or kick the case to city council if the requested provisions are more than what can be granted by city council. That's the reading that we had.
I don't think we'd want to do that anyway,
Yeah.
but
And, yeah, and
it's a really unclear provision, and at some point we should probably come back and
yes, we
take a
are
look at that.
planning on revising this entire section.
Okay. In that case, I may have more questions later, but for now I'll throw it open to plan commissioners. Any questions for Mr. Engstrom? No? Huh. Chris, you do? Yeah. Mr. Storr.
Hey, I noticed that quite a lot of the building itself lies within the 100-year floodplain. That seems to be a really kind of a unwise place to construct any sort of a permanent structure, doesn't it?
So yeah, I can address this, and perhaps the applicant can as well. So what is shown on the site plan is the official FEMA flood map for the 100-year floodplain. The applicant had a survey done, and they disagree with the FEMA map. They think the properties would mostly be out of the floodplain, really just barely touched by them. And also they would be built, they would be flood-proofed, basically. It'd be built 1 foot over the floodplain and waterproof, all that. And here's Brad Bennett, our assistant city engineer, who can also help with that explanation.
Yeah, let me pull up a little graphic here real quick that might help. There's always confusion between what the floodplain and floodway is, so I've got this handy-dandy guide from our state of Illinois that does actually a pretty good job of describing it, so I'm not going to do it for me. Let me try that one more time. Yes. Okay. So this is an illustration of floodplain versus floodway. You are allowed to construct within the floodplain if there is a floodway designated for the water body, and there is for this section of the Boneyard Creek, as Jeff showed in his earlier graphics. So it is permitted to actually go ahead and construct within the what they call the floodplain. The floodway, you actually have to get a special permit from the state. And basically what you have to do for the, you can kind of see it in this graphic. What the floodway is it's actually the area of the stream that's calculated as if the flood fringes were filled in. That would be the area that's necessary to convey the 100-year flood without increasing the water elevation more than 1/10 of a foot. So you can kind of see that in this graphic. So they are permitted to construct within the floodplain. If it is within the floodplain, you would have to flood proof it, which really for residential structures, there's two ways to do it. You can put fill in and build it up, so that you're 1 foot above what the base flood elevation is, or you can use elevated walls, essentially building it on stilts or piers, to get it up above the 100-year flood elevation. We'll point out, the FEMA floodplain limits and floodway, those are based on computer modeling using the best available data that we have. So it is possible to go out and actually survey your property and based on those elevations compare those against what the FEMA, the computer model predicted elevations are. And there's a process you can go through. It's called a letter of map revision or a letter of map amendment, where you can submit that data, and it's a very detailed process that you have to go through, but you can essentially get your property delisted from the floodplain or floodway based on providing elevational data to prove that those portions of your property are not within the floodplain or the floodway. So there is a process because it uses best available data. It isn't always a perfect process. It's an approximation of what they would expect for the 100-year floodplain or the 100-year floodway.
Mr. Dorr.
Aye. Well, how much difference is there between the surveyed between the topographic survey that was done and the presumably LiDAR-based map that was or floodplain that was calculated through the model?
Okay, so it's kind of hard to see here, but this map shows the FEMA line for the floodplain, which kind of goes through halfway or a third of the way through 408 here. And then the actually surveyed line for the flood elevation just barely touches the corner here at 408. And I think the other two would be out. Is that? Yeah, the other two properties would be out. So basically it's just this small corner would be touched by the floodplain, and they would raise it up.
I'm intrigued. Could you explain how this difference exists? When I look at the soil survey, this area is mapped as either poorly or very poorly drained soils. And Drummer, these are typically soils that you find in low-lying areas that are regularly inundated with water.
I mean, that's correct, and I think from a historical perspective, someone told me at one time there was actually a spring in this area of Urbana. I mean, if you go back far enough, I think a lot of fill has been brought into this area to raise it up over time, which might be an explanation for some of the settlement and foundation issues that we've seen in the area. But remember, the FEMA is just all based on computer modeling, and the city actually partnered with the city of Champaign and the University of Illinois, and we hired the U.S. Geological Survey back, I think it was like maybe 2007, 2008, and they actually ran and did the models that FEMA used to do their determination. And it changed if you look at the floodplain floodway prior to the modeling, and that some of that reflects the improvement Champaign has made. Some of it reflects having, better data. When we remodeled it in 2007, 2008, we were able to have LiDAR the last time they had, modeled it before that, they didn't have that data available. But even with the LiDAR data, there's a big difference between LiDAR, data that might be, a 2-foot or 5-foot variance versus actually going out and shooting it into 1/100th of a foot with survey grade equipment. So, I think that's why you sometimes see discrepancies between the two.
Boy, I'm inclined to almost ask you to see that data because I find that I'm still rather intrigued. Would you get that? How much of a difference do you get? A foot between the LiDAR and the surveyed, or 6 inches, or 4 inches?
I'd have to go back and
Vertical?
check, but if memory serves me, I thought the level of accuracy of the LiDAR was either plus or minus 2 feet or plus or minus 5.
Oh, that's a lot different than my understanding. Moving on, this also assumes that there's no obstructions in the in the drainage, I assume, and yet that can happen, especially with trees and especially old trees. And if you raise the ground, you're also kind of constricting that floodway and forcing the water up. How much was that taken in? Was adding the additional fill or raising the additional or putting additional walls and so forth? I wonder how much additional that might constrict and raise the floodwaters.
Well, if you go back to the floodplain versus the floodway, per our existing flood hazard ordinance, and ours is based on the state model ordinance, you are allowed to build development within the floodplain as long as it's flood-proofed. So you can see from this graphic, the way that they define and calculate the floodway is assuming that the flood fringes, are encroached upon, and that's what the floodway is essentially almost like a transit zone. You don't want to build within the floodway because that's where you're going to see your impacts on water elevations. But within the floodplain that's outside of the floodway, you can go in and do encroachment and fill those areas in.
Well, if you raise the ground around the flood plain, you're basically displacing that water someplace else, and the neighbors who have not raised their property any are likely to suffer that additional displacement of water, would they not?
Well, like I said, based on current policy and computer modeling, they're saying it will not.
That good?
If I could just follow up on that and point out that what's under consideration today is not whether or not it can be developed here, because there are already rules and regulations on the books for that, which address the floodplain issue. But wanted to stress that what is under review is the height, the added height above the 35-foot maximum, as well as the side yard setbacks. So just wanted to bring that back to remind you what's under consideration today.
Thank you. Any further questions? Mr. Trail?
Put this right. Given, assuming they get the permit and they get the benefit of the Creekway credits, are they current, or do these in essence represent the maximum footprint on the lots that they can develop?
Basically, yes.
Okay.
Any further questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Ingstrom. And Mr. Bennett. I want to now just briefly cover the procedures for a public hearing. Staff has presented its case. The petitioner may now make a statement and present evidence. Other proponents of the request may talk to the commission. Then opponents can talk to the commission and may ask questions of the petitioner by relaying them through me. Other people may speak to the question. There may be additional comments by staff. And then the petitioner may rebut but not introduce new evidence. The opponents may rebut but not introduce new evidence. Petitioner may present a summary of his or her case. And then we'll close the public hearing and the Plan Commission will discuss and possibly vote. So if the petitioner would like to come forward, and just please state your name for the record.
Hi, my name is Adrienne Strom, and I'm here to answer any questions to the best of my ability.
Great, welcome. Do you have a presentation? Or did you want
Just here to answer questions.
Just here to answer questions?
Yeah.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Ms. Strom? Anybody? No.
Hey.
Mr. Ackerson?
Just a very brief one. If this were adopted with the recommendations made, the one thing I'm a little uncertain about is I see the trees preserved. There's an agreement to move parking. Thoughts about where the parking or how it will be handled and how binding is that?
Well, the parking would be moved to the Opera House, which is relatively nearby. In the meanwhile, when the Creekway permit, if it were to be passed, immediately the 25 feet is given. And upon the decision to develop that area by the city, all the parking will be moved at that point. I think it's outlined in the memo that those agreements are in the process, if not have already been decided upon.
Great. Further questions? Mr. Storr?
Thank you. Would you care to elaborate anything? You heard the discussion that I had with Brad. Would you care to add anything to that with regard to flood proofing and the floodplain?
I don't have much more to add other than the foundation that we decided was slab on grade, and it would be a minimum of about 70 feet from the creek. So it would be well out of the floodplain.
All right. Any further questions? Mr. Trail?
Did you have any discussions with the city about potentially changing the zoning of this area?
They are in compliance with the zoning. The only thing that they are asking for is because they're in the boneyard.
I understand.
Yeah.
I just was.
Okay.
If
Go
I
ahead.
could address that. In the initial conversations about this project, that possibility was brought up. And at the time, we thought that just proceeding with a Boneyard Creekway permit would give them the flexibility they need.
The gist of my question is they're wanting a height variance where, because of the nature of B2, I would think this would be an area the city would want developed more densely rather than less. And because it's zoned B2 right where it is, if they had something that allowed them to increase the footprint, they might be able to develop not only this number of units, but more at actually a lower height. So I'm wondering if, the argument is the height. I'm thinking, to me, that this area looks like one where it looks like they're trying to squeeze as much development as they can into a very tall, thin building for it, for its spot.
Yep. So a B4 central business district which is directly east of the property, that would allow for reducing all setbacks, and they could have the building right on top of the sidewalk. But we discussed kind of some of the trade-offs with that, and with the existing single-family homes, we thought keeping that front setback would kind of keep the look along the corridor that we have and not impact those homes too much.
Thanks. Thank you. Further questions? Mr. Storr?
Are you aware of any claims that have been, or, I mean, would this area be, fall under the FEMA flood insurance, for, be eligible for flood insurance?
I think you'll be able to answer.
Yes, all three properties would be eligible for flood insurance. They're not required to have it. The flood insurance program is voluntary. I'll add a caveat to it. Most lending institutions, if you're getting a mortgage for, building or buying a structure, as part of the mortgage agreement, they'll require you to carry flood insurance. So in that case, because of a mortgage or the financing, it may be mandatory. But yeah, all three properties could participate in the flood insurance program.
Thank you. Further questions? Okay, thank you very much. Any other proponents of this proposal wish to speak to the Plan Commission? Anyone not in favor of this proposal wish to speak to the Plan Commission? Sir, please. Just if you could just come to the table and state your name, that'd be great.
My name's Rich Castle. I live at 101 South McCullough, which is about 2 or 3 houses from the first house that's going to be developed. Castle, C-A-S-T-L-E.
Oh, okay.
Yes, Castle.
Great. Thank you.
I've lived there for 30 years, and I know the issue isn't the settling or the type of soil, but I've seen houses with cracks in the basement and foundations. Even the Opera House parking lot and the back of the Opera House has a nice big crack in it now. Strawberry Fields, I don't think it's a wise decision to build there, but besides that, I don't think that's the point today. If this goes through, when I look out my front porch window, I'll be looking at 3 buildings. They're attractive buildings. I mean, that's nice architecture, and that's not the point. But as far as your criteria for approval, does it fit the character of the area? I would say at this point, no. All the houses are they're houses, whether they be rentals or people living in them. And then you've got 3 lots that are going to have these buildings that are 40 foot tall, 41 foot in the middle. So I'm assuming they're probably more like 43 or 44 at the top peak. So does it fit the character of the neighborhood? I don't think so. Does it impact whether the design or proposal height and open space allows adequate access to light and air in surrounding streets, parkways, and properties? I don't know. Some of these buildings can be almost twice the height as the house next door, and one house is going to have 1 building on each side, so I think it would definitely affect the light in that house. Parking, there's not a lot of parking in that area. So all the parking is going to be behind, and then you're going to be driving down an alleyway, which is not in good condition now. I don't know if he's going to rebuild the alleyway to do that. I can't see that being a great idea as well. 412, I know this isn't, I don't know if this is an issue or not, but I mean, 412, before it was demolished, after they bought the property, wasn't touched for, I'm going to say, probably about a year before they had to cut down weeds that were probably 4 or 5 feet tall. So I hope he decides to maintain his buildings better than he does the lot before he had it torn down. Overall, I don't see, I'm totally against the height, the added height. I think it's ridiculous. The side yards, it does impact the houses besides them. What's going to happen with those houses? If somebody else decides to develop something in there, you're going to require them to stick something that fits with the character now, which is a 4-story building, and that I would imagine would be pretty expensive to do. So I'm not saying I would be in favor of 3 of these buildings in a row, but I would be more in favor of that than seeing one there, then a house, another building, a house, and another building, and then a house. So I'm against it. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, sir. Any other persons not in favor of the proposal? Elect a representative, gentlemen. Yeah. We won't bite. Thanks. If you could just state your name.
My name's Theodore Dolman.
Theodore, what was the last?
Dolman, and it's Doellman. I'm opposed to the increased height and the variance on the required edges. I think that I'm a resident on one of the houses that would be directly next to the buildings, and the increased height is it's a lot for that area. On top of that, the taking out that much of the side yard is really crowding on to the houses next to it. If you're going to have a 4-story building, then a house, and then another 4-story building, there's not a whole lot in there for the the residents of that house. It's it's you're kind of like crowding them out there. I think it could even potentially be lowering property values in the area, and I don't see it as a good idea.
Any questions for Mr. Dolman? No. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Any other persons not in favor? Huh? Oh yeah, I forgot to ask you to sign in. We'll take care of that afterwards. It's okay. Mr. Roberts. Could you please sign in, sir? I don't want to make the same mistake twice in a row.
Very good. So my name is Dennis Roberts. There are so many aspects about how this arrived at the Plan Commission that are unfortunate. That partly one of the reasons why I wanted to come tonight was just to say that there's a real need for procedural change, I think, in how all these Boneyard Creek cases are decided. And I'm the guy who asked that it be reviewed by you. And even though you're going to only be able to look at this case with like the strictest blinders without being able to see the overall impact that and many levels of questions that could be raised about this project and actually any kind of projects that are along the Creekway. We've already mentioned, even though it can't be decided or it can't even be used, I guess, officially as unless it's like part of the appropriateness of the construction, about the soil quality that Mr. Storr was bringing to our attention, the fact that not just allegedly, but according to historic record, the whole area, a great part of that area was a buffalo wallow, that there was a spring there, it was a swamp, and a lot of that land closer to the city, but also some of this land, was filled in by debris after the 1887 fire in downtown. And the attempt was to fill in the buffalo wallow, and so it would not be a hindrance, because if you came down Main Street into the city in the 1860s, you had to cross a bridge right there at pretty much where the Opera House is. There was the creek crossed the street, and there was a bridge. And you look at the old maps, it's right there. And this is mentioned in Cunningham, his history of the city. So, okay, so the whole question of subsidence in this property, and we're talking about, well, is it in the floodplain or is it in the floodway? But the issue that we see in houses that are built within the last 10 years, 15 years, we're talking about the Opera House, which is a 4-story building, is you go back, I just wonder how many people here have actually walked in the area, taken a tour. The mayor, the city council came up with lots of questions about this. There are sinkholes in some of the properties' backyards, not these properties, but adjacent properties. And there have been repairs in sinkholes in various places in that block. There is, well, anyway, so that's like one question that hasn't really been addressed, but so the question about whether something's in the floodplain or not, or whether the construction would actually affect floodwaters being redirected into other people's property, I think is a really valid one. But we're not going to talk about those. For the appropriateness doesn't touch them. We're only going to talk about the height and the width of these buildings. So, fine. Okay, let's do that. The other question I had was just really one of the reasons why it's also before you is because I don't think that it's possible to allow and make to award bonus points in the Creekway without any public input. And currently, there's zero public input in that discussion because it's administrative. And we have a Creekway commission that is not a commission, doesn't act as a commission, and takes no votes that are binding. So we have one person who's making all these decisions to allow these bonus points. So that's something that I think has to be addressed by the city council, not this commission. But I guess I have a couple questions about the effect on the community, the immediate community. We've already heard from some of the people who live in houses nearby. And if a 4-story building is being allowed, but it's only being called a 2-story building, if it's really a 2-story building, why can't it be shorter? And, fit within the B2 regulations for height. But we have a very clever thing happening. We're having a 4-story building built, but it's called a 2-story building. And how do they get the extra stories in there? Well, it's a balcony. It's an enclosed balcony. So either we have a really clever designer, but and I don't know if it, but we're also allowing this kind of like weird kind of amorphous kind of definition to be approved by allowing it extra height bonus points. And I think it might be appropriate to decide whether each individual property should get the bonus points or maybe just one. I mean, you don't have to award them all at the same time. You can decide if certain properties should be reviewed for height. And one of the reasons would be because once those 4-story buildings are built, what are the other people going to do with their properties? Right now, I mean, the whole block used to be cottages. So how does that affect the property values of those people who are now trying to sell their house in the future when they retire, and they've got a student apartment on one side and a student apartment on the other side? Oh, they're luxury apartments. But what's going to be, the only thing you have left is to sell out to not another homeowner, to a developer who's going to put another 4-story apartment up. And that's not even part of our discussion because we're just talking about height and width. So this process has so many issues, like even the zoning issue that you brought up, David Trail. It's a really good one. If this was rezoned, to a higher density, well, you could say, well, then the plan is that we want to see density along the arterial streets, and we really would like to see infill development, and we'd like to see a larger apartment building. And guess what? You could build a larger apartment building facing this street, totally out of the floodplain, and you could preserve the backyard as an amenity in the city. Not only could it be at a walking path and a trailway along the creek, but it could be like a grassland area. And if you've been to that property, which is pretty much hidden because I didn't even realize that there was an alleyway street behind it. It's just blocked. You just don't see it. But it's becoming more and more open because we've had demolition. It really is a natural parkway with mature trees and a lot of potential as a park land for the city. So that was one of my reasons when Daryl Fossey first approached me about this issue, that, you know, I saw all this potential, and I don't think that, I guess we don't have any real choice. A property owner can build on his property what the heck he wants. And if they can't make a decision or they can't come into agreement with a gentleman who would love to sell his property for consolidation and maybe consideration of a larger structure, but if the property owner just doesn't want to do it for whatever reason, you're going to get then on this street first we're going to get 3 shotgun apartments, and the facades don't even have doors facing the street. These are side turn buildings. Now, in almost any other part of the city, hey, the East Urbana neighborhood, it's not allowed. So this is a street that's fallen through the cracks. And it hasn't been updated. We're looking at the last time that this block's been planned for is the 78 Boneyard Creek plan. There's no other drawings in any other of the plans about this section of town. And my vision is that the connectivity to the university, I think, does kind of actually ask for increased density and opportunities for apartments and things like that. But did we want to get just little shotgun apartments on little tiny pieces of property? If there was adjoining a property, you'd have at least a footprint that you could make something of, just like some of the buildings on Green Street. They could be larger and they could have 3 stories, and they would actually look like not like shotgun apartments, but on the Green Street in the Moore District, we have buildings that actually assimilate to try to look like the homes near them, and that would be really an appropriate thing to see coming out of the Planning Commission I would support that 100%. But now we're going to have properties that are going to be forced to sell to builders who will now build additional kind of properties. So I don't know. I guess I'm against the height. I wouldn't allow anything that goes beyond the zoning for the area. And I'm not sure why the Boneyard Creek somehow trumps city zoning. I just can't figure that out, how that works.
It doesn't trump city zoning. It's part of the zoning ordinance. So
So
it's in harmony with.
So it's in harmony, okay.
Yeah,
well,
it is.
but there's two different restriction levels. And now we're just looking at how they vary.
It's a special provision.
It's a
There's
very special
no question.
provision. Okay. So I didn't really come prepared. I mean, I don't have lots of slides to show you. I could show you the cracks in the settlements around the creek area. But this is just so abstract from, I think, what the real concerns for development here are, that if these are approved, I think it just sets a precedent for more of the same choices. And maybe that's what the city wants. Maybe the city really doesn't have a way of figuring out what could be best and give guidance, but maybe we just settle for what Joe wants and what Jim wants and what Fred wants when they come before with their piece of property to present to you. And I guess really that's all we can do at this point. So thanks for your time.
All right. Thank
And
you.
I don't know if there's any questions. I
Any
probably
questions
didn't.
for Mr. Roberts? Mr. Otto.
Yeah, Danny.
So I'm not clear. I mean,
So that was,
in the end, you seem to, are you for it or against it? And if you're against it, are you against it for any reason that we can address? Because
Well-
it seemed like on every issue you said, well, this is something we should talk about, but you can't consider it, and that's
Well,
the
that's
way I
what we're
understand it. So
told.
what?
Actually, that's not true. We can consider anything we want. We can add any conditions that we want. That's just simply not true. What I think the point was that we're not here to discuss the science of the floodplain. We're here to discuss land use. Now, subsidence issues, the Plan Commission is just not equipped to talk about those things. We can consider them if there's strong evidence.
I wasn't clear on his message to us,
Okay.
because in the end, he seemed to say, city council needs to do this when we're here. I
Right.
don't know. I
So-
don't know what his
Sure,
message was.
sure.
so although there are positive aspects about the IG in general, I think that there is a problem with compatibility in the area in which it is located, because these are probably again, half again as high as any building that's been constructed there, except for the Opera House, but that's zoned differently. Whether it is compatible with the spirit of the underlying zoning district, I think just because it wants to be taller than the zoning district would really generally allow most people. I think that the building should be designed to not try to fudge away getting extra height just to have a slanted roof so that you can have a patio on the top of the building, or to use a two-story module format to get two-story apartments that are 4 stories tall. I just think that's inappropriate. And then I have a concern about the width of the properties as well, and how they're going to cast shadows, and how they're going to impinge upon the neighbors. And I have a dislike for side-turn buildings that have no front entrances that face the street, because I think it's extremely inappropriate for any community in a neighborhood setting. And this is not campus town. This is a community area within the city, within a few blocks of the downtown area. And I think more honor should be applied to the designs of these buildings. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Any further for Mr. Roberts? Mr. Trail?
I guess my question is, you've heard our 3 options, and you have a larger process in mind, it sounds like, that you'd like to kick in. Which of the 3 are you proposing that we choose that will serve the best to get these issues considered?
Well, your creativity should be able to tell you that. I really think that the buildings. I think it's only fair to the public to have as much public input on this, because these are some of the first cases that are affecting redevelopment near the Boneyard, especially on the west side of the Boneyard Creek. This is you could call the commercial section of the creek, and there's just been no oversight because so many things have been done administratively. So, I think the more public input you can get, and the more public review before a final decision is approved, is the best. That's what I would say.
Thank you.
Good?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Thank
All right, thank you. Any other person? Sir, if you state your name, please, when you get up to the table. And sign in.
My name is Darrell Fosty. I live in the neighborhood, and I'm also the adjoining property owner.
So you're at, what address are you at?
I live at 409 West Main.
409 West Main, okay. So you're directly sort of behind these?
Directly behind it.
Yeah.
And I own 402 and a half, 404, and 406 West Springfield, as well as 102 North McCullough. Part of this is my tenants at 404 West Springfield, of which Aisha and Dennis, you read their letter.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're opposed to it. They have 2 young children in elementary school, and to have a big building like this that would basically cast shadows on their house was unacceptable to them for various reasons, of which he said. And my tenants here, 4 of them are here. One of them spoke. Mr. Dolman spoke. They do a lot of yard work, and they're pleased with all that. I see them out there doing yard work all the time. And now then to have this 40-some story building, 40-some foot tall building right next to what they're doing is just, it just flies in the face of what they're doing. And I want to do what I can to make it as nice as I can for them. And I try, and I appreciate them coming tonight to voice their opposition to this. If these buildings, I proposed to the city council in the 90s, and I proposed to it again as well as the mayor. I think there should be a larger building here. I've just had 5 of my houses had to be demolished. I know this has nothing to do with the subsidence issue, but there was just the foundations broke apart, the roofs forced apart, and they were just unacceptable. So now then, we have these vacant lots. I know that this property is at risk. I've had a chance to sell these properties, as some of the members know. I refuse to sell an individual property because I'm just selling my problem to them. And I just refuse to do that. I didn't want to. If I have a bad car and I know it's got problems, I'm not just going to try and sell it to you just because to get rid of it. And that's what I'm going to be forced to do now. If these 3 apartment buildings are built, then what is that left for me? Then I'm going to have to sell my property to someone who I know it's not if, but when their properties will break apart, just like mine has. In the 1990s, I was able to retain the services of one Dr. Alberto Nieto. He is a geologist with the University of Illinois, has a PhD in geology and a PhD in civil engineering. Highly regarded consultant worldwide. So I asked him what's going on, and he told me there's issues here. And he said the main thing you need to do is put your footings below the level of the Boneyard Creek. Well, if you're going to do that, that requires a big building. Well, these single lot buildings are not big buildings. And I had told the city council, so why can't Urbana have something nice, a big thing? We have them in Champaign. Why will we settle for these little cookie cutter apartments? Mr. Fell's a great architect. He can design something. If someone hires him to do it, he can do a great job. But he's been hired to design 3 cookie cutter apartments that it's just been my experience as a property owner that it's not if, but when these properties will also break apart. And in 20 years, they're sold to someone down the line. I guess my question to each of you is, would you be willing to invest in this property? Would you put your money here in these apartment buildings where I can show you where an apartment building built in 1990 there, in the 1990s, it's cracking, it's breaking apart, it's settling down. Would you invest your money in this? And Mr. Trail, to answer your question about the B4 zoning, I discussed it first with Mr. Engstrom, and he responded positively. I then talked to Mr. Peter Boxa regarding that, and he said he did not want to upzone because that was only going to require some commercial space, and he did not want to have any commercial space. He only wanted the apartments. He said, what I want to do is I want to see what the maximum number of apartments I can get. That's all I want. He said, I had a time renting the commercial space at his Opera House Apartments, and so he did not want to deal with any upzoning, and because of that. So I tried to consolidate. I said, okay, well, let's put our properties together so we can build something. I said, okay, how much do you want for your properties? Oh, how much do you want for yours? So, well, I'm not sure. Then he said, well, this is a deal. We'll put it in writing that whatever we agree upon, you have to follow through. So we'll set a price, and if I think it's too high, then you have to buy my property. And if I think it's too low, then I'll buy your property. Oh, heads I win, tails you lose. So I have a difficult time dealing with Mr. Boxa. I've tried numerous times, and that was my response. I mean, what's wrong with the B4? That would solve everything. But to Mr. Boxa, he didn't want the commercial requirement. So I've tried many things, and now then I'm saddled with, what do I do with my property? Would you guys like to buy it and build on it? Well, yeah, maybe at a fire sale price. That's my dilemma. I don't want to sell my property at a fire sale price. I had hoped that I would get some sort of retirement benefits out of it, since I've been working on it for well over 30 years. So now then I'm faced with this and what to do. And I got to look at these cookie cutter apartments. They look nice, but not in this neighborhood. Not when here's my house, then here's the apartment, here's the next house, here's the apartments, and here's the next house. I mean, we talked about conforming to neighborhoods. We dealt with setbacks. There's an apartment building on Elm Street that sticks way out. Well, we had, at the time, that conformed to the setback requirements. Now then, the setback requirement They took the neighborhood in consideration when they did that. So at least now then, is this what we want, to have apartments and vacant lots? I mean, my property just wind up being vacant lots. Is that what the city wants? Is that what the commission wants? Do I sell them for a fire sale price? I'd hope not. But who wants to buy them when I'll say, I'll sell it to you, but I want you to know you're gonna have subsidence problems unless you put your footings down at least 15 feet, maybe more, maybe 20, put pilings or something. Well, that's gonna be a costly venture for the structure that I can put here. And that's my dilemma. So then I'll wind up with vacant lots until something happens, I guess. So anyway, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to entertain them as best I can.
Any questions? Mr. Storr?
Mr. Fossey, you said that the foundations crumbled quite a bit because of moisture coming in and out?
No, what happened in the 1960s, the Boneyard Creek was dredged out deeper. There is literally a 4-foot waterfall at Lincoln Avenue. So this was dredged out to accommodate potential flooding risk. But they dredged it out 4 feet, and but about 2 feet down is the water table, maybe even higher than that. So here is a channel, and here's the water table. So the channel is here, and water keeps pouring in 24/7. Dr. Nieto says as it moves, there's surface erosion. We can see that soil particles moving, but there's subsurface erosion. It's not quite as definable. Of course, you can't see it. But every day, every hour, soil particles are slowly moving into the Boneyard Creek. It happens along river banks whenever there's a flood. As the river comes up, the banks, as Professor Nieto said, get recharged. In other words, all the land along the river that's flooded is full of water. And as the water pulls down, then the water comes out of the banks and actually leaves little holes. It's referred to as piping, because people see these holes, it looks like it's been a pipe put in there. And as it does, it takes soil particles with it.
So this is, really, the subsidence issue is not an issue for the Plan Commission to
He asked
consider.
me a question.
I know he did, sir, but
I know,
if
but
you could.
Okay, well, anyway, that's
Yeah.
what it is. I'm sorry about
No,
that.
that's okay,
But
that's okay.
It goes
Yeah.
back to, if this is all approved, then what do I do with my property?
I
And
understand
that
that
goes back
point.
into
Sure.
the subsidence engine.
Yeah.
And I'd be happy to, if you're interested in buying it, I can discuss it with you afterwards, and then I'll have no issues with this.
Well, maybe after I get my daughter through college, but.
I know that's a costly factor.
I hear,
Anyway.
that's a valid point, and we hear
I know
that
that's
loud
the
and
whole
clear.
thing. My only reason I bring it up is it affects, if there's 3 cookie cutter apartments, then what do I do with my land in between?
Sure, sure.
And that's where it comes in,
Yeah,
the subsidence. I don't want to, so.
yeah. Well, I appreciate it. Any further questions? Well, thank you very much, sir.
Well, thank you, I appreciate it.
All right, thanks. Okay, if you would step up and state your name and sign the paper.
My name is Brigitte Pieke, and I own Close Knit. It's on the corner
Oh, yeah.
of Birch Street
Uh-huh.
and Springfield, so I look straight across there.
Uh-huh.
I have a little bit of a problem with the parking situation. And 3 more apartment buildings will increase the parking. Even though you are saying you have parking behind the buildings, the building across from me is also a student housing or apartment complex. The apartment parking garage, which you have to fulfill, you have to have the parking, is never used. It's always free, yeah, because people have to pay money for that, and they are not willing to do that. I see this every day, yeah, because my property is right there on the corner. I also think seeing how many buses go by there, and that's good. The buses are good because they take the people to Camperstown, etc. Yeah, but there's a lot of buses, and I mean like 2 or 3 in one row sometimes. But I think that the street needs to be larger. It is too small, yeah. That's a different situation there, you know. But I don't know. I just wanted to raise your viewpoint that this is not a good thing for this neighborhood, to have so many apartments built there, you know. So if you can think about how big this street is and how many cars, I think it's a good idea to count the cars or do something like that. It's really hard to when it's 5 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning. There are a lot of cars going down there, many more than when I started to buy the house. Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to raise the issue a little bit.
Yeah.
And I know it is a problem with the parking. There's right now there is 2-hour parking there, but maybe there shouldn't be any parking there because when you have the apartment blocks, because people will park anywhere, yeah, and they do that.
Any questions? I will tell you that there has been a transportation corridor study of Springfield Avenue. It was approved a couple of years ago. There's been a grant money awarded, and there's a long-range plan to improve that street. So some of the concerns you raised, I think, in the long run, may be addressed. Yeah. So, all right. Anyone else? Yeah.
Brent West, not the one from Champaign. Brent West, I'm a resident of historic West Urbana. I just am here because I have general concern for my fellow citizens of our fair city. Mostly just pointing out this picture that has these lovely giant apartments flanking these small houses that I just want to reiterate that I am against the height and the width of these buildings because it completely clashes with what is existing in there. And after the fact, even if they're built, will continue to clash until those houses are knocked down and replaced with something that's very similar. And then you'll have something that's row after row of these tiny apartments when, if you waited for the long run, could have built one giant one, if that's the wishes of Urbana, or put slightly larger houses of people that could be paying tax money on that. Also kind of laugh at this picture because the trees apparently cast shadows, but buildings do not. And that...
It's just a...
it's a rendering, I know, yes. But just saying that the shadows that would be cast by these buildings, if there's a 40-foot building next to a 14-foot building, of course the shadow difference is, especially this small one that's completely flanked by it, it will be a problem for whoever lives there. So that's all I wanted to say.
All right, any questions? Thank you, Mr. West. Is there anybody else who wishes to address the Plan Commission against this proposal? Would the petitioner like to address the Plan Commission? Would anyone else like to address the Plan Commission? All right. Well, thank you all for your testimony. And so now we'll close the public hearing portion of this and begin to discuss. Does anybody have any thoughts on that they want to share? Mr. Trail.
I don't know.
I drove by, I'm guessing, 30 feet. Or, yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't seem to me, obviously, pretty hard to tell.
Yeah, it is. If it's a 4-story, 35 feet. Maybe 40. Yeah, maybe 40. Yeah.
It doesn't look to me like it's 4-story. It looks like it's 3-story.
Somebody said
Yeah,
that.
but
I
if
didn't
you
go
look
in.
at the photo here, it's...
Yeah, I don't know.
If it's 4 stories, it's got to be at least 40 feet.
Yeah.
Can
I
I
don't
come
think
to
it's
the character
4-story.
of the neighborhood issue? Because, yes, there's this little, but it's got some taller things right around it, too. Just kind of one thing. But anyway, I'm just curious how tall that building is.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
Hoping
Jeff's
is
trying
gonna
to find
it quickly.
the miracle of modern technology.
Yes, he has everything at his fingertips, I'm sure.
There goes Jeff.
Oh, we're going to do street view.
Um,
Okay.
So there is a 4-story building on the south side of Springfield right across there, and 312 appears to be
No, yeah.
3 stories.
Yeah. So. Taller than the houses, not as tall as these buildings proposed. Ms. Bynum, go ahead.
With those properties too, I think it's somewhat different because they're on the end and they wouldn't be in the middle. You wouldn't have like a building, then a house, and a house and a building. So I think that makes a difference also.
Mr. Hopkins?
I would, I don't have the thing in front of me, but I would make a motion to approve. And if I get a second, I'll explain why.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Hopkins. Let me let him make it. I guess that's probably good enough.
Terry probably has.
Terry's got the number,
You
yeah.
You can say what I moved, which one I moved.
I will.
And when I say approve, I mean approve with the conditions already established. So here's my reason. This is zoned B2. It's not zoned R1 or R2 or R3. So from the point of view of what the plan has said, what the thinking is, and what the zoning ordinance now says is that the single-family houses that are sitting there are the past, and we have decided that Springfield is an arterial with too many buses, lots of traffic, and 4-story building across the street, businesses across the street, the Opera House apartment owned by the same person who's proposing these, who's therefore apparently willing to take the risk of investing in these properties, because he's already invested one right next to it that apparently does or doesn't have the problems established. So I think much of the concern about these intervening houses is looking backwards, and that's not what this is about. Now, the second thing is there's concern that it would be nice to have one big building and not these narrow ones. And I have two thoughts on that. One is, if you drive down University in Champaign right now, the last thing you want to think about, or even the edge of Urbana at Goodwin along University, the last thing I want to think about is another big building right up against the street in a B4 zone implied by consolidating. The idea that what we might get is 3 single lot buildings and maybe later a consolidated 2-lot building that looks a little bit different, not massively all the same. That, to me, is what we've said we want to have happen. And this is making it happen. And the height and setbacks are part of making that happen. And it's not that there's no planning for the boneyard. There is planning for the boneyard. That's why we have these ways of inducing people to make dedications without our paying for them of area along the boneyard so that we can build the path. So from my point of view, this is what we're trying to do.
Mr. Otto.
I agree with everything Mr. Hopkins said. And in addition, I'd like to address the issue of the doors. I'm looking at the photograph or the artistic rendering. And I share the concern. A blank wall facing the street is bad, but doesn't have blank walls. They're 55 to 60% glass. And given, as near as I can tell, the design of the side door that are frameless, if on the house close to the Opera House, one of those window panels could be a door because it's all glass, and we couldn't tell it. I mean, so, to me, I like the aesthetics of these buildings. It's been a long time since we've had anything built in here that has a modern vocabulary. If those other houses are crumbling, the foundations are falling down, it's a matter of time and they're going to be gone. And the landowners are sovereign. If they can't make a deal to swap out and so on, we have no ability to coerce them to. And so I see no reason not to go ahead. And frankly, I'll be happy to see the construction.
Any further discussion? Mr. Trail? Yeah, Mike.
And I, the question for us is not whether we like or don't like the aesthetics of particular, although obviously we're going to consider that sorts of thing. I was thinking whether these, I don't think these maybe are the best, especially the resistance to inclusion of any commercial. Breaking the block up with these is going to make it more difficult to do something else. We don't gain that many residential units, really. If the idea is to get, downtown Urbana a little bit more dense, it's right along an arterial, it's a busy street, it's already got a lot of commercial development along it. I'm not sure that in the end, this fits the zone, the overall zoning goal. I know it's B2, but the overall zoning goals, the arterial, it's on an arterial, it's right next to downtown, all those kinds of things. Would these be built if we didn't grant them the permit? And I'm guessing they would not. And without the extra height, because the lots are very small. So I don't know whether it's better to achieve the longer-term zoning goal by preventing something that I think would harm it in the long run now, or say any construction is good construction and we don't want to stand in the way. I kind of more fall on the side of I'd rather, it sounds like to me someone's just decided to pull the trigger and put something up, and I'm not sure that we gain enough residential from this to justify giving them the credits from the, Boneyard Creek, the bonus that allows them to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Trail. Anything further? I will clarify that both multifamily and commercial uses are permitted in both B2 and B4. So you'd have different building requirements, obviously, but you can do both uses.
Right, but I think the problem here is the larger setbacks.
Sure, yeah.
Ends up on these very narrow lots getting not much residential bang for the buck in the development from a zoning standpoint.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Otto?
I think we work with the zoning that's on it since there's no application to change it. I walk by the Opera House. I've lived in my neighborhood 3 blocks from this for 11 years, and most of the time that first floor commercial space has been vacant. And the problem you're going to get into because of the Boneyard, to have viable commercial space, you've got to have parking on the property. And that's a skinny piece of land. I mean, I just don't see how you're going to, as Ms. Piacus already said, in her business, parking is a problem.
It's less the commercial, it's the fact that you really don't end up getting that many additional residential units.
We're trading 3 for 11? 4, 4, and 3?
4, 4, 3.
I think there were 4, 2 single families and a duplex.
There now, yeah.
Yep.
Mr. Storr?
Thank you. I share Dennis Roberts' concern for the sideways apartment construction that kind of seems to be taking over and changing the character of our of our neighborhoods. Living in historic East Urbana, we've had so many of these sideways apartments put in. It really is causing the neighbors to complain, and rightly so. I would prefer to see a different facade that would be more customary and fitting in with the neighborhood. But I'm not, this is not my property to design. But I have concerns about the small setbacks, and of course the concerns about the poor drainage of the soils and potential for, if not flooding, certainly problems from settlement, which is a more proper term for what everybody's been calling subsidence and consolidation than what would be gotten from a slab footing, slab on grade construction. I raise these concerns and offer them for the committee to consider.
Thank you. Further discussion? I think I'm ready for somebody to make a motion. If there is a motion on the table? That's right, I forgot. All right, in that case, let's have a roll call.
Ms. Bynum? Yes. Mr. Fitch?
Yes.
Mr. Hopkins? Yes. Mr. Otto?
Yes.
Mr. Storr?
No.
Mr. Trail?
No.
Mr. Turner?
Yes.
And Mr. Ackerson?
No.
That motion passed 5-3?
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be, I guess, this goes back to the questions I asked Jeff. So, this can be appealed, correct? To the council. I was a little gray. That was that third provision in there that.
There is an appeal process outlined under section 13-4,
Right.
paragraph N in the zoning ordinance, which does allow appeal authorized to the city council from your decision.
Right. So, barring an appeal, this will not be heard by the city council? Is that correct?
Yes, it's officially approved now, barring an
It's
appeal.
officially approved, barring an appeal. So, just to clarify for everybody. All right, well, thank you all. We don't have any new business. We don't have any audience participation. Staff report? No staff report. No study session. Therefore, we are adjourned.